that supports new product development programs on the front end relies on self-reporting of consumers, whether they be surveys, whether they be focus groups, interviews, and coming out of that, and field sales representatives, and coming out of that, there's a list of criteria, performance criteria, that is then used to feed into the design program. But those are all things that are stated, and they'll be entirely different than what you observe those people doing, because those real behaviors are the things that tell you how they're built, how they're interfacing with the product, how they're thinking, and how that processing of all of that input that the product is giving them is manifesting themselves in that interface. Now, what they say they do is equally important, it's just different information, and you need both, because what they say they do is the emotional baggage that they bring to point of purchase, and it's what they tell their friends. Now, you can get pretty anal on measuring design, and this really freaks out designers. Most designers say, you can't measure design, you know, it's the creative process, black box, you know, it's bunk. You know, there's so many different tools and techniques. This just shows one example where you can parse out the tactile signature, the kinesthetic handshake with a package, and the visual signature. In this particular case, presenting to this consumer whose hand is through an orifice different form factors for a food package, and asking them a series of questions and scoring that, and then down 2 stations down, doing the same thing where they can see the package but they can't touch it. And now we can start to build this palette of information about, well, these shapes and these textures really drive these perceptions, and these shapes and these perceptions drive these perceptions. Now, from a design standpoint, we can say, well, you know, that shape is perceived as being feminine, it's felt as being feminine, and here's how we can start to drive that. So it really shapes and informs the packaging design process. It's also a great way to test and help narrow down different design solutions. You got to go where people use your products. It's not cheap, but the cost of failure, if you are putting out a global solution, is an order of magnitude larger. So go there. It's better to talk to one person than none. It's better to talk to 10 than 5, which really kind of drives the consumer insights people in most classic organizations crazy, because they love to have statistical significance. And the most powerful research, design research, that you can be doing right now is not based on statistical significance. It's based on smaller sample sizes and deeper drill downs. You'll get a lot more knowledge and information about what to design by spending hours on end talking to 5 people than interviewing 50 people and asking them 3 superficial questions. Here's the biggest nut to swallow on this kind of user-centered design strategy, is that it gets expensive in the first phase. And in many programs, based on my experience, it's usually the most expensive phase of work. So in traditional stage gate process, as you move forward down the design development program, the investment costs increase gradually until you get to production, where you're cutting the huge checks for tooling. You need to think about a 2-hump camel, where on the front end you have this investment into figuring out what to design first, and then go ahead and design it, and then you have that traditional second wave where you have to cut the big checks for the tooling. It's no different than if you have to go and write an exam. The better you study, the better your grade is going to be. The other advantage of doing this front-end work is that you will have information that is user-driven, consumer-driven, that when challenged about, well, we need to get rid of that feature, we need to get rid of that one because it's going to reduce the cycle time by 3 seconds and it's going to increase the line speed by this, you can figure out whether you're going to be neutering the design or whether you're going to be preserving the integrity of the design. Every design program needs a shepherd, someone who's going to be there from start to finish, who knows what you discovered on the front and ensures that every step of the process that integrity component of the product is preserved. Now there's another interesting concept of design fidelity. And we've worked in this space on cockpit ergonomics for F-18s. And, you can't screw up here. You screw up, you drop a bomb, and someone is dead. But someone says, well, what does that mean, and how does that relate to, packaging? Or how does it relate to medical equipment? Well, it's paying attention to the details. And that's what I mean by design fidelity. If you look at world-class designs, if you look at your best designed product that you own, someone has paid attention to each and every last detail. Don't let the details slip. When you take the experience and you start to look at how people interface with it, it's easy to see why a cap on a bottle that is shaped like your lips is going to be a lot more pleasurable for a person to wrap their lips on than a pop top that syrup comes out of. It's not brain surgery. The only thing you need to figure out is how big are lips and how do they vary across the cohort that you're selling into. If you do the research, this is a surgical instrument that you don't want to meet. This goes up your nose. But the remarkable thing about this design, and there's only really one remarkable thing, and that's that little wheel at the top that you can move with your index finger that rotates the cutting window. That was such an enormous breakthrough, and it was an insight that came by doing ethnographic research with two of the leading surgeons in the world. But by witnessing how they use the instrument and understanding the dexterity in the human hand and understanding eye-hand coordination, they didn't articulate the solution. We said, well, we could solve that. We could make it a lot easier for you to do this based on the ergonomic inputs. A lot of people like to shrink products. Size matters. I know many of you have heard that before. But if you take things like electronic products, and this just happens to be a blood glucose meter, cell phones are the same thing. Everyone is shrinking cell phones, shrinking. Well, guess what? These things have not shrunk. So the difficulty in using these products has been increasing. So we're seeing a thing happening right now in the electronics, both in consumer electronics and home healthcare electronics, where people are starting to realize that actually going bigger is going to help usability. The next wave of smartphones will be bigger. You're starting to see that happen now. People are going to 3¼ and 3½-inch screens. You're going to have to get bigger pockets. You can create new categories by thinking differently. There's been a lot of people at this conference talk about socially responsible design. It can actually define a new category of product, like Papermate did with this biodegradable pencil. And you can create new premiums by taking the same material, and if you solve a consumer problem like this cup does, by rotating the tab, you can open and close the sip hole lid so it doesn't spill when you walk. You solve one of the biggest complaints that people have when they're transporting their coffee to and from their car or drinking on the run. And this is only a bottle of Listerine, but I wanted to show you how some fundamental understanding about our hands and our eyes can really help take something that is, 5 pounds of Listerine, it's a club bottle, how you can turn that into a design that is a lot more functional, where each and every detail is driven by some aspect of human usability. We have a large shoulder at the top because as it weights, it hangs up in your hand. We have radii that have been dictated by mass production and fill lines. We have embossed ridges on the side that catch your finger so that it doesn't ripple down, and we've increased the size of the finish because we know, even though people hate to admit it, people drink out of the bottle rather than use a cup more often than not. So everyone thinks this innovation stuff is really easy. I think everyone in this room will confirm that it's a pretty hard job. But when you look at what's in front of us and where you can differentiate and how you can differentiate yourself from everyone else, design is a very potent element in your arsenal. For those of you who I haven't met before, I've been keep updating this list. These are things that I keep hearing from people on why they can't innovate. I'm sure none of you hear this in your own company, but these are ridiculous excuses. This is a result of poor thinking. Thanks very much. Hopefully you got something out of growing old and how it sucks, and welcome.